All right, for anyone with skin in the game in the European auto sector, listen up. The whole narrative we heard in 2025 about the EV winter, that's over. But don't think for a second that means we're back to business as usual. We're now in early 2026, and a completely new and honestly a much more complicated reality is taking shape. That perfect storm of slowing EV demand and those massive CO2 penalties, well, it's forced a real moment of truth. This is what we're calling the Great Recalibration.
So, here's how we're going to break this down for you today. First, we'll talk about the Great EV Truce. Then, we'll dive into the new strategic divide that's splitting the industry. After that, we'll look at the solid-state battery race. This is the big one. We'll also cover what's actually selling, because the hybrid hedge is paying off for some. And we'll wrap it all up with some actionable investor insights. Let's get into it.
Okay, first up, let's talk about the single most important development we've seen so far in 2026, and that's the de-escalation of the EU-China trade war. Now, this did not play out the way a lot of people expected. It isn't the big, simple tariff wall we were all bracing for. No, it's something way more subtle, and frankly, a lot more challenging for the European car makers. So instead of getting into this big, ugly tariff war, what we got was more of a soft landing. The EU and China cut a deal, and it's based on something called a minimum import price, or MIP for short. You can think of it like a gentleman's agreement, with huge financial consequences. It completely rewrites the rules of engagement for how Chinese car companies can compete over here in Europe.
And here's the bottom line, the number you really need to care about. This MIP creates a price floor right around 30,000 euros for a standard family-sized EV coming from China. On one hand, yeah, that's a firewall. It protects the most vulnerable European models, think about the little Renault Twingo, from getting wiped out by a wave of super cheap Chinese cars. But, and this is a huge but, the trade-off is massive. It basically forces the Chinese brands to move upmarket and compete head-to-head on tech and features right in the heart of Europe's most profitable segments. The fight just moved to a whole new arena.
Right, so this new trade reality, it's been a massive catalyst. It's basically forced all the big legacy automakers to finally pick a lane. No more hedging. And what's happened is that their strategies have crystallized, creating this really clear and honestly fascinating split in how they think they can win the next decade. The industry is definitely not moving as one big pack anymore.
And this slide really lays out the two completely opposing philosophies that have emerged from this. It's a real fork in the road. On one side, you've got companies going all in on what's called vertical integration. They're betting the farm that owning the entire tech stack, from the software to the batteries, is the only way they'll be able to justify their premium price tags. Then on the other side, you've got the horizontal partnership crowd. Their strategy is all about leveraging partners to cut costs, share the insane risks, and just get new cars to market way, way faster. Two totally different bets on the future.
So, in the vertical integration corner, you have the titans of luxury. No surprise there. Look at Mercedes-Benz, pouring billions into developing its own proprietary operating system, the NB-OS. You've got Ferrari opening a brand new e-building just so they can make their own electric motors and batteries in-house. Make no mistake, these are incredibly high-risk, high-reward bets. They're gambling that their brand, plus their own unique tech, will be enough to command a huge premium in this new electric world.
And then on the other side, the horizontal partners, you could call them the masters of pragmatism. A perfect example is Renault. They're launching their new Stellantis SUV for international markets. But here's the clever part. It's built on a platform from their Chinese partner, Geely. Think about that. It lets them jump into a whole new segment with just a tiny fraction of the usual capital cost. Stellantis is doing this all over the place, and even parts of VW are getting on board, using partnerships to de-risk this whole crazy transition.
Now let's look beyond the immediate corporate strategy, because the long-term winner of this whole race, well, it might be decided by a single piece of technology, a massive breakthrough. I'm talking about the solid-state battery. This is the holy grail that absolutely everyone is chasing. And this number, 95%. This is why this is such a huge deal. It shows you the leapfrog potential here. Back in January, Volkswagen's battery company, PowerCo, dropped a bombshell. Their prototype solid-state cell, made with QuantumScape, kept over 95% of its capacity after 1,000 charging cycles. To put that in perspective, that's like driving a car for over 500,000 kilometers. This is not a small, incremental improvement. This is a potential game-changer for everything: durability, range, safety, the whole shebang.
You can bet that this news has ignited an absolute all-out race to get this stuff into mass production. You've got Stellantis and Volkswagen on these incredibly aggressive timelines, both saying they're aiming for series production in 2026. I mean, that's now. This puts enormous pressure on rivals like BMW, who are being a bit more cautious with the 2030 target. Whoever wins the race to actually build these things at scale could completely rewrite the pecking order in this industry.
Okay, so while the engineers are off in their labs racing towards this amazing solid-state future, we need to pull back for a second and get a serious reality check. We have to ground our analysis in what's happening today, because what the car companies are planning and what you and I and everyone else are actually buying in the showroom, well, they are two very, very different things right now.
And look, the data here is just undeniable. This chart right here is what's causing sleepless nights in boardrooms from Wolfsburg to Stuttgart. The market share for pure battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, has just stopped. It's completely stalled out at around 17%. The growth engine just quit. And at the same time, look what's happened with regular old hybrids. They have surged. They're now the #1 electrified choice, grabbing almost 35% of the entire market. It's clear, consumers are hedging their bets.
So what does this mean? It means this trend is a massive validation for companies that took the hybrid hedge strategy. You've got players like Stellantis, who are now leading the entire hybrid segment in the EU. And then there's BMW, with their power of choice platform, which is just a fancy way of saying they can build gas, hybrid, and electric cars all on the same assembly line. These guys are being rewarded right now, big time. Their flexibility is basically insulating them from the pure EV demand shock that's hammering their rivals who went all in.
And this split in the market is creating a landscape of wild extremes. I mean, just look at the contrast here. You have Porsche, a giant of performance, getting absolutely hammered. Their sales collapsed mostly because they dropped 26% in China, where the local EV brands are just eating their lunch. But then, look at Daimler Truck. Their electric truck sales shot up 67%. Why? Not because of some huge consumer trend, but because a German toll exemption literally made them cheaper to operate. And then you have a niche player like Polestar growing at 34%, proving that if you have a very focused premium EV strategy, you can still win. It's all over the map.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. What does this completely recalibrated, totally fractured landscape actually mean for you as an investor? How on earth do you navigate a sector like this where one company is getting crushed in China while another is booming just because of a change in a toll road? We think it comes down to 3 crucial takeaways for your 2026 playbook. Number 1, flexibility is king. Right now, in the short term, the winners are the companies that can pivot between gas, hybrid, and electric. It's that simple. Number 2, watch the tech race. The progress on solid-state batteries is the single most critical long-term differentiator you need to track. And number 3, follow the regulation. Never, ever underestimate the power of policy. We're seeing it create and destroy entire markets overnight.
So that perfect storm of 2025, it's past. Now the great recalibration begins. This is going to be a period of incredibly intense strategic competition. Every single major automaker has just placed a multi-billion-dollar bet on a very different path forward. And the key question for all of us watching this space is, who placed the right one?